I want to cover three things with you this afternoon. First, talk about people, my personal journey using the gig economy and the change within my team. Organizations, how I'm starting to see organizations of all sizes adopt the gig economy. And then just touch a little bit on an idea that I call expert intelligence. The first part is, and all of you are at a Future of Work conference, so I won't spend too much time telling you, it's hard to find a website or a magazine that doesn't talk about workforce transformation. And every study out there says, hey, there will be a lot more independent workers, and those independent workers are going to the cloud as we start to see lots of platforms out there fundamentally change the way people connect. But the thing that I like to share with people is, let me tell you about the two sides of the gig economy. On the left-hand side, you see the business to consumer part. There's been a lot of IPO activity. We have Uber, Lyft, Instacart, and I wish I knew some of the Turkish specific ones, but we're starting to see consumers, or all of us in our personal lives, expect to be able to press a button and have something delivered to us, an outcome delivered. And in many ways, those expectations are going to start to drive how we work. The idea that there's going to be a lot of friction to get something done is going to start to melt away, and we're going to start to see the gig economy and what it represents fundamentally change the way we work. In fact, end of last year, we saw Upwork go public, and we're starting to see companies like WeWork and others make progress, which are all validation of this trend. The number one thing that executives ask me when I present is, hey, why now? What is the signal that you're seeing? I hear a lot about the gig economy. I hear a lot about things, but what are you seeing? And I talked a little bit about the significant IPO activity. 10 years ago, venture capitalists started investing in these companies. And it's now, particularly this year, that we're starting to see these companies go to the public markets and get significant valuations as they start to scale their efforts. Going public not only helps them scale their efforts, but starts to make their business models transparent to investors and really starts to push on the conversation around classification and law and all of the things that are being figured out right now as it relates to workers in the gig economy. We're also seeing a lot of companies adopt gig economy strategies. IKEA just purchased TaskRabbit. It seems that not everybody wants to build their IKEA furniture. I know here in the United States during football season, Intuit had commercials running nonstop talking about a new product called TurboTax Live. They put people in their software. You're one click away from an independent CPA while you're doing your taxes to ensure that you get the maximum benefit and don't make any mistakes. And we even see Amazon. Just the other day, they promised one-day delivery to all Prime members. And that's built primarily off of their offering Amazon Flex, which is independent drivers delivering packages. And one of the things that we did last year was launch a solution area, Microsoft 365 Freelance Toolkit. And I thought that maybe 5 customers of Microsoft would give a call and say, hey, we're kind of interested. We're thinking about doing an enterprise pilot with freelancers. Can you kind of share with us how you're working? The response has been tremendous. And so this year represents the beginning of starting to understand how gig economy platforms can scale, how companies can adopt gig economy strategies, and how enterprises can start to bring freelancers into the workforce. But if you don't believe those numbers, just the other day, Webster's dictionary officially added the gig economy as an official word. So I think now that the gig economy is actually a thing. One story I like to tell, and everybody asks me, why are you so passionate or interested in the gig economy? And it was a Saturday about 4 years ago. I had just had my second daughter. It was a Saturday afternoon, and I was working on a PowerPoint presentation for a big executive pitch that we had internally. And I remember hearing in the background my daughter crying with my wife, and I knew in that moment that something was out of kilter, out of whack. Here I was working on a PowerPoint presentation instead of spending time with my family. And so in the back of my head, I remember a startup friend of mine saying, hey, you should try to get a virtual assistant. And in that moment, I reached out and I said, hey, to a virtual assistant service, and said, hey, can you get me something to do with my family on Sunday? And an hour later, an answer came back. In fact, it was a strawberry festival that was 2 miles away from my house. And so the pictures that you see on the screen right now are from that day. And it was that moment that I started to believe that things were different. It was the first time that I'd reached out over the internet, asked somebody for help, and on demand, an answer came back. And so I went all in. And so on the right, you see all the services that I use on a weekly basis. I use Upwork, Fiverr, Fancy Hands as a virtual assistant, Clarity FM. I connect with experts all the time. In fact, we just launched a podcast, Gig Mindset Podcast. And I learned about the podcast by reaching out to a podcast expert instead of spending days and days researching what a podcast could do. I use Instacart for my groceries, Thumbtack, M-Tailor. I use Stitch Fix. In fact, this shirt is from Stitch Fix, and of course, Uber, Lyft, and others. But for me as a technologist, that moment represented something that I had seen before. It was like the first day that I got my Netflix envelope and realized that I was never going to Blockbuster again. Or the day that I picked up my iPhone and realized that I had a web browser in my pocket. Or even the first time I called Uber. I still remember I was out with friends and nobody had heard of Uber. And under the table, I called my Uber car and I walked out and there was my car with the door open saying, "Hey, Mr. Estes, your ride is here." And even now, when I talk to Alexa, these moments in my life, I knew would fundamentally change everything. And that's how I feel about the day that I called a virtual assistant. And so I talk a lot about the gig mindset, the idea that you have to think differently. And we call it the inclination of people and organizations to engage on-demand expert intelligence, to reclaim time, drive innovation, and rethink what's possible. But I'd like to start to tell you about a story of Ken. Ken's on my team and, well, he's a video editor, so he made a video.
Paul, do you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry, we have a technical problem. We can't hear the video. There's no sound.
Okay. Well, I'll move on and I'll post the video to YouTube and send everybody the link.
Sorry.
So the one thing I've had to do is sort of teach people how to start adopting the gig mindset, how to start working with freelancers. And there's 4 steps. First, you have to be able to break projects into their individual parts. You have to be able to identify whether it's freelancers or full-time employees, who is the best expert to do that. You have to learn to delegate. And for many of us, delegation is one of the hardest things. You have to give up control. You have to start to trust that someone else can deliver to your expectations. And the last part is to evolve, is to take what the gig economy is teaching us and learn from it. What my team is starting to learn is amazing. They're learning systems thinking, how to build a system around yourself using technology and freelancers to really do exponential, impactful work. How to build a network of a modern network of doers, freelancers that are around the world and in the United States that are able to accomplish tasks on demand. And the last part is leadership at every level. It used to be that you had to start at the bottom and work your way up until you got that magical manager's badge. Now, you're able to pull together a team to accomplish a goal, even at the early stages of your career. But the thing and the major challenge that we face is change. This is from a growth mindset exercise that we did just a year ago. And it was from a lady who said, hey, this is how we always did it. And now she's having to rethink everything, rethink how she works, how she engages with people around the world to get our work done. Satya has a great quote. We must respond to opportunities before they become conventional wisdom. The idea that I get a ride from Uber by picking up my phone right now is just normal to me. The idea that I would go to Airbnb and rent a house from a stranger is normal, but these things, even 5 or 6 years ago, were not conventional wisdom. In so many ways, I believe that working with freelancers at large companies will soon become as normal as those experiences. But the challenges are real. I talked a lot about change. How do we change our behavior? How do we lean into abundance in this new way of working? How do we transform existing policies? My partners on this journey are from procurement in our HR team and many other groups as we've tried to figure out how to have solid policies that both protect the company and ensure that we're doing things responsibly. And then how do you make sure you have the necessary infrastructure, your tools that allow for this way of working? So we launched the Microsoft 365 Freelance Toolkit. And there's a number of different tools that we found as we built out our program that were powerful. SharePoint, which is a site, a SharePoint communication site, which is a site that all people in the company can go to find out about the program. Power BI, which is where all of our data on the freelance pilot goes, and we're able to analyze and figure out how to get better results. Teams with guest access. We run Teams, Microsoft Teams, and where we have freelancers, external staff, and full-time employees all collaborating in real time. And then Microsoft Flow, which automates all of the processes. It was December of last year when my daughter had an ear infection, and Microsoft has a product, a benefit offering called Teledoc. And I pressed a button and a doctor showed up on my phone and treated my daughter. And it's then when I realized that freelancing wasn't just about developers and designers, because that doctor on the other end was an independent doctor that was treating one of the most precious things in my life. And so the gig economy and the gig mindset will start to impact all sorts of scenarios and all sorts of industries. I talked about Teledoc, I talked about TurboTax, and even on your phone, there are services where you can get on-demand access to tutors to help your kids with their homework. The last thing I like to talk about is you. What are the things that you can do to reclaim time, to rethink about how to lean into a passion project? What can you do to help your team reskill, help them find the resources that aren't available today in your organization? And what can you do to help your company better serve your customers? As the world transforms at a quicker pace, we all have a responsibility to be curious. We have a responsibility to lean in and understand the trends that are driving the future. I think that the gig economy represents a trend that is big as the internet, as big as the mobile revolution, and as big as the future of AI.
Thank you.
I want to thank you for your time. If you're interested in following the work that we're doing, you can find me on Twitter, Paul F. Estes. Reach out to me on LinkedIn. We post the podcast information there. I write articles. I share stories of freelancers, thought leaders, and CEOs. And then always you can check out the Gig Mindset Podcast at gigmindsetpodcast.com. I hope you have an enjoyable rest of your conference, and thank you so much for having me.